My name is Joseph Bowles from Minnesota, and on my 67th birthday, my daughter sent me a box of Swiss chocolates. I thought it was a kind gesture, until the night I placed them on the table, and her father-in-law took the first bite. Minutes later, he collapsed in front of us all, gasping for air. That was when I realized the gift had never been meant for him. It was meant for me. Stay with me as I tell you everything that followed. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. The box was too elegant to be casual, a deep crimson, wrapped in gold ribbon, with the words Swiss chocolate printed in cursive across the lid. It arrived on my 67th birthday, sitting on my porch as though it had been dropped from heaven itself. My daughter, Emily, had sent it. Her neat handwriting on the card read, "Happy birthday, Dad. May life always be sweet for you." I held it for a long time, studying the ribbon. Something about it felt rehearsed. Emily wasn't the type to send gifts. For years, my birthdays had passed with quick phone calls, sometimes a text, sometimes nothing at all. But this year, she'd sent a box of imported chocolate. Expensive by the look of it. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself maybe she remembered. Maybe she cared again. That night, I carried the box to her house, where her in-laws were gathered. The Bowles name didn't mean much in that room anymore. What mattered was her husband's family, the Whitakers. They looked at me like I was a guest in my own bloodline's home. Edward Whitaker, her father-in-law, sat heavy in his armchair. A man with a taste for indulgence, a man who enjoyed being catered to. When I placed the chocolates on the table, Emily's face lit up, but not with the warmth of a daughter, with something sharper. "Dad," she said, her voice as smooth as silk, "why don't you open them? Share with everyone." I smiled faintly, unwrapping the ribbon, but something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the way Daniel, my son-in-law, shifted in his seat, eyes darting to his wife. Maybe it was the too quick way Emily urged me forward. Whatever it was, instinct told me to pause, and in that moment, I made a choice. I slid the box across the table toward Edward. "You should have the first taste," I said with a polite smile. He chuckled, pleased. "Don't mind if I do." The foil crackled as he tore into the first piece. He tossed it into his mouth, chewed, and raised his glass of wine. "Exquisite," he declared. Another piece followed, and another. Laughter filled the room. My daughter laughed too. And then, silence. Edward's hand froze mid-air. His face turned gray. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a second, no one moved. His eyes bulged, his throat worked against some invisible force, and then his whole body collapsed sideways, convulsing, his chair crashing against the wall. Screams erupted. Emily sprang to her feet, her hand pressed to her mouth in pretend horror. Daniel leapt forward, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. I sat frozen, staring at the box of chocolates now spilled across the table like little bullets. Poison. The word rang in my skull like a church bell. My pulse hammered. But I didn't move. My eyes flicked up, and for a fraction of a second, Emily's met mine. Cold, sharp, unreadable. And I knew as sure as I knew my own name, those chocolates hadn't been meant for Edward. They were meant for me. The room became chaos. Edward was dragged to the floor, someone pounding his chest, others screaming into phones. Daniel shouted instructions with the urgency of a commander, his voice cracking under the weight of fear. Emily stayed near the wall, wide-eyed, her hands trembling, but not with the panic of a daughter fearing for her father's life. No, she was calculating. I could see it. Her gaze cut to the chocolates, to me, then back to Edward writhing on the floor. And in that instant, I felt something snap inside me. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't drifting apart or cold distance. This was an attempt to erase me, clean, quiet, dressed up as a birthday gift. Emily hadn't sent me sweetness. She had sent me death. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They stormed the house, carried Edward out on a stretcher, and filled the air with urgent voices. "Suspected poisoning," one of them muttered, as they rushed him to the ambulance. The family trailed behind, weeping, frantic. All except me. I remained seated in that silent living room, staring at the half-empty box, my hands trembling but my mind clear. My daughter had tried to kill me. She wanted me gone. And the question I could not silence was this: why? Why would the girl I raised, the child I loved more than life itself, want to bury me in the ground with poisoned chocolate and a fake smile? That question burned hotter than the shame of being sidelined, hotter than the humiliation of being replaced in her heart by another man's family. It was betrayal made flesh, and it demanded an answer. But answers could wait. For now, there was only one thing I knew with certainty. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. They thought an old man would accept his fate, lie down, and die. They were wrong. And as I walked out of that house, the faint echo of sirens fading into the Minnesota night, I whispered to myself, if she wanted me gone, she should have made sure I couldn't fight back. Because I would fight back. Slowly, quietly, brilliantly. And when it was done, Emily would learn what it meant to betray a father. When you reach 67, the past doesn't sit behind you like a shadow. It clings to your bones. Every scar, every decision, every sacrifice finds its way into the weight you carry each morning. And when I think of Emily, my daughter, I don't just see the woman standing in that house, handing poisoned chocolates to her father-in-law. I see the little girl who once reached for my calloused hand in the snow, trusting me to lead her home. Her mother, Margaret, passed when Emily was only 10. Cancer took her quickly, as if the disease had been waiting in silence all along. Margaret had been the warmth of our home, the one who softened my sharper edges. When she left us, the world turned cold in ways I still can't fully describe. Emily clung to me then. She would crawl into my bed in the middle of the night, whispering that she was afraid the dark would swallow her too. I promised her it never would. I promised her I'd always be there, even if it meant burning myself to ash to keep her safe. And in many ways, I did. I worked double shifts at the mill to keep food on the table. I gave up promotions that would have taken me away from home because I knew she needed me present, not just as a provider, but as a parent. Every weekend, I packed sandwiches and drove her out to the lakes, teaching her how to skip stones across the water, how to bait a hook, how to see the simple beauty in things. When she wanted piano lessons, I bartered with a neighbor, repairing his roof in exchange for weekly sessions. When she dreamed of college, I put away every spare dollar, cutting corners on myself to make sure tuition would never weigh on her shoulders. I thought love was enough. For a time, it seemed to be. Emily grew into a bright young woman, full of ambition and charm. She excelled at school, made friends easily, carried herself with the kind of poise that made people take notice. When she graduated, she hugged me in her cap and gown and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Dad." That moment was worth every sleepless night, every sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, the light shifted. She met Daniel in her second year of college. Tall, confident, polished in a way that screamed money. His family, the Whitakers, were well off, business people with old money and old arrogance. I still remember the first dinner at their house. Edward Whitaker greeted me like a stranger borrowing a chair at his table. His handshake was limp but deliberate, a show of dominance wrapped in courtesy. His wife, Lorraine, smiled too much, asking questions with an edge. "So, Joseph, do you rent or own your home? Do you still work at the mill?" How quaint. Emily laughed along, not cruelly, but nervously, as though she wanted them to approve of her by minimizing. That was the first red flag. The second came later, when Daniel started visiting our home. He'd glance around as though the walls were too small, the furniture outdated, the air beneath him. Once, when Emily left the room, he smirked at me and said, She's going places, your daughter. I'll make sure of that. The implication was clear. I hadn't. I was the past. He was the future. I told myself not to take it personally. Love makes fools of us all. Emily seemed happy, and that mattered more than my pride. Still, little humiliations piled up. At their engagement party, Daniel toasted to a new chapter, free of old burdens. Guests laughed, glasses clinked. Emily kissed him, beaming. My chest ached, but I stayed silent. At the wedding, I was placed at a table far from the couple, while Edward sat at the head with Daniel, beaming like the king of a castle. When I stood to give my speech, my voice trembling with emotion, I noticed Emily fidgeting, glancing nervously at her in-laws as though measuring every word against their silent judgment. Later that night, she thanked me with a quick hug and whispered, "Please, don't make things awkward, Dad. Awkward." That was the word she used to describe the father who had raised her alone. After the wedding, the distance grew. Phone calls became fewer, then shorter. Visits felt formal, like I was a guest to be accommodated rather than a father to be cherished. Edward and Lorraine were always there, always hovering, always weaving their influence. I could see it in the way Emily started dressing, in the way she spoke about money, status, and appearances. One afternoon, during a barbecue at their house, Edward pulled me aside. He had that smug smirk plastered across his face. "Joseph," he said, "you've done well enough. But let's be honest, you're not really equipped to guide Emily in this next stage of life. Daniel's family will take care of her now. You can rest easy knowing she's in good hands." Good hands, as though mine had been unworthy. I swallowed the insult, but inside, something cracked. Emily overheard. I'm sure she did. Yet she didn't defend me. She looked down at her plate, chewing in silence, while her father-in-law dismissed the decades of sweat and sacrifice that had built her life. The final humiliation came last Christmas. Emily invited me to dinner, and I arrived with a modest gift. An old photo of her and Margaret I had restored and framed. I thought it would mean something. She unwrapped it, glanced at it quickly, then set it aside. Minutes later, she presented Edward with a gold watch, engraved with the words, "To the best father." The words twisted in my chest like a knife. When I left that night, the snow crunching under my boots, I wondered if Margaret would even recognize the woman our daughter had become. But still, I loved her. Fathers don't stop loving, even when they're bruised and discarded. Love is a curse that way. It endures, even when it shouldn't. And then came the chocolates. That was the turning point, though I didn't know it at the time. Because when I unwrapped that ribbon and saw Emily's too bright smile urging me to taste them, I remembered every red flag, every humiliation, every whispered dismissal. And for the first time, I thought, something isn't right here. And I was right. I thought the poisoned chocolates were the worst of it, that nothing could cut deeper than realizing your own daughter had wrapped death in a ribbon and called it love. But I was wrong. That was only the test run. The real strike came later, deliberate, cruel, and final. It began with papers. A letter arrived one cold morning, thick with legal weight, my name typed across the envelope. Inside, eviction notice. My home, the house where I had raised Emily, the house where Margaret's laughter still lingered in the walls, was no longer mine. According to the documents, the deed had been quietly transferred years ago, refinanced under Emily and Daniel's names, while I was told it was just paperwork to help with taxes. I had signed where my daughter asked me to, trusting her, believing that children protect their fathers the way fathers protect their children. Now, that trust had been weaponized against me. The letter gave me 30 days to vacate, 30 days to erase a lifetime. I stormed to Emily's house that night, my hands shaking as I held the papers out to her. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking between rage and disbelief. She barely flinched. "Dad, calm down. It's just business." You don't need that old place anymore. Daniel and I have plans for it. Renovations, maybe renting it out. You can move into one of those retirement communities. It'll be good for you. Good for me. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing before me with the little girl I once carried on my shoulders. That house is your mother's memory, I whispered. It's our history. How could you— But Daniel cut me off, stepping in with that smug superiority he wore like cologne. Joseph, you need to stop being so dramatic. You'll have a roof over your head. Isn't that what matters? You should be thanking us for taking this burden off your hands. Burden. That's what my home had become in their mouths. For weeks, I tried to fight it. I met with lawyers, but each one shrugged, pointing out the signatures, the notarized transfers, the airtight clauses. My daughter's husband had planned it all carefully, and Emily had stood at his side through every stroke of the pen. I had no case. The worst came on moving day. I hadn't wanted anyone there, but Daniel insisted on helping, which meant he showed up with a pair of movers, standing in the doorway of my home like a general overseeing a conquest. Emily trailed behind him, her arms crossed, eyes down. Neighbors watched as box after box was carried out. Pieces of my life stacked like trash on the curb. "Don't take that," Daniel barked at one of the movers when they reached for Margaret's old rocking chair. "It doesn't fit the look of the house. Leave it." My chest tightened. "That's not your call," he smirked. "Actually, Joseph, it is." The neighbors pretended not to stare, but I saw their pity. Whispers curled at the edges of the crowd. He's being thrown out. His own daughter. Can you believe it? I wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Every nail, every board, every picture frame in that house was a piece of me, and they were ripping it away in broad daylight, with my daughter silently watching. Not one word in my defense, not one tear. By evening, the house was empty. My house, my life, my everything. I walked through the hollow rooms one last time. Dust clung to the air, carrying the faintest echo of Margaret's laugh, of Emily's childhood footsteps. I touched the frame of her old bedroom door, the growth chart still etched in pencil marks, her height at 6, 8, 12. My hand shook as I traced the lines, each one a memory, each one now stolen. Outside, Daniel locked the door, jingling the keys like a prize. He handed them to Emily with a grin. She slipped them into her purse without looking at me, without even saying goodbye. That night, I slept in the back seat of my car, parked near the frozen lake where Emily and I once skipped stones together. I stared at the ceiling, the cold seeping into my bones, and felt something inside me collapse. Not just heartbreak, not just defeat, something more final. I had been erased. Days turned into weeks. The community whispered. Some offered pitying glances. Others avoided me altogether. To them, I was a fool. A father swindled by his own blood, cast aside like an unwanted relic. And perhaps I was. One afternoon, I wandered into the diner downtown. The chatter quieted when I entered. At the counter, two men leaned close, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. Can you believe it? His daughter threw him out, signed the house right over to her husband. Poor old man never saw it coming. Not poor, the other replied with a chuckle. Just stupid. My hands clenched around the coffee cup until my knuckles turned white. I left without finishing my meal. The humiliation was complete. But the worst wound came not from the papers, not from the movers, not from the neighbors' whispers. It came weeks later, at a family gathering I foolishly attended, hoping for some shred of reconciliation. Edward sat at the head of the table, recovered now from the poisoning incident, smug as ever. Daniel beside him, Emily at his arm. Conversation flowed like wine, laughter filling the air. I sat at the far end, a ghost among the living. And then Edward raised his glass. To family, he declared, his grin cutting across the room. To new beginnings, to leaving the past behind, and to those of us strong enough to build the future. Laughter followed. Glasses clinked. Emily smiled. And in that moment, I understood. The poisoned chocolates hadn't been desperation. They had been rehearsal, a test of whether fate could do their dirty work for them. When it failed, they chose another path. Legal erasure, public humiliation, stripping me of dignity until there was nothing left. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat in silence, staring at my daughter's face, memorizing every line of betrayal. And deep inside, in the place words cannot reach, something began to take shape. Not a plan. Not yet. Just a quiet, immovable resolve. The kind of resolve a man carries when he has nothing left to lose. When you've been stripped of everything, your home, your pride, your place at the table, you learn quickly that silence is your greatest weapon. Rage makes you sloppy. Tears make you weak. But silence lets you see what others miss. I spent the first weeks after my eviction in a cheap motel on the edge of town. The walls smelled of mildew. The mattress sagged like it had given up long before I arrived. But I didn't mind. Solitude became my forge. It was there, in the humming quiet, that I began to take stock. Daniel thought he had erased me. Emily thought I would fade away like dust on the wind. And Edward, well, he sat smug in his chair, believing the Whitakers had won. But they hadn't counted on one thing. I had spent my entire life studying people, watching their tells, listening to what they said in the silence between words. And I knew their weakness wasn't money, or power, or even reputation. Their weakness was arrogance, and arrogance blinds. I started with something simple. The Whitakers loved appearance. They loved their gatherings, their charity events, their endless displays of wealth and influence. Daniel in particular thrived on being seen as a man of control, a provider, a builder. What few people knew, however, was that much of Daniel's success was borrowed, propped up by lines of credit and risky investment. He was a man living in a house of cards, and Emily, standing beside him, had no idea how fragile it really was. I still had copies of old paperwork, tucked away in boxes that had escaped his mover's eager hands. Mortgage documents, refinancing agreements, even a few emails Emily had forwarded me years ago when she thought I might help Dad understand. She had no idea what she had given me back then. With those, I began pulling threads, quietly, carefully. I reached out to the bank, not as Joseph Bowles, the old man they had dismissed, but as the co-signer Daniel had once needed back when his credit was less than perfect. That detail, long forgotten, was still etched in ink. My name was buried deep in their files, and that meant I still had leverage. A polite phone call here, a carefully worded letter there. I asked questions, raised concerns, requested reviews of certain transactions. Nothing loud, nothing that would draw attention back to me, but just enough to slow things down, just enough to make Daniel's carefully orchestrated cash flow stumble. It worked. Within a month, whispers reached me from the same diner where I had once been humiliated. Daniel's newest real estate project had hit a snag. Investors were concerned. Payments were delayed. I sipped my coffee and let the warmth fill me in a way it hadn't in months. The first tremor had hit, but I wasn't finished. I knew Edward prided himself on being untouchable. The patriarch of his clan, he loved nothing more than to sit at the head of his table and watch others bow to his authority. So I planted a seed of doubt in his kingdom. One evening, I mailed an anonymous envelope to his office. Inside were copies of the same documents I'd unearthed, showing Daniel's debts, his overextended accounts, his reliance on my signature in ways Edward had never imagined. No explanations, no accusation, just facts, raw and damning. Men like Edward don't need explanation. Their paranoia does the work for you. I heard about the first cracks days later. At a family dinner, Edward had lost his temper, shouting at Daniel, demanding answers about finances, about risk, about whether their fortune was being jeopardized by reckless choices. Emily, caught in the middle, had tried to calm them both, her voice breaking under the strain. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. The satisfaction came from knowing their perfect image was beginning to fracture, and it was only the beginning. I also knew that people like the Whitakers lived not just on money, but on perception. Their reputation was their oxygen, so I began cutting off the air, one breath at a time. I started small, submitting anonymous tips to the local paper about questionable zoning permits in Daniel's latest development. An unsigned letter to a regulatory office, highlighting potential irregularities in his business practices. A quiet conversation with an old friend at the bank who owed me a favor and agreed to double-check certain accounts. None of it was enough to destroy him outright. Not yet. But it was enough to create noise, enough to force him into constant explanation, endless damage control, sleepless nights pacing the floor, while Emily asked questions he didn't want to answer. And I knew it was working the night I received a phone call. "Dad!" Emily's voice trembled through the line. She hadn't called me Dad in months. "Have you heard anything about Daniel's business? People are saying things, and Edward's furious. He thinks someone's trying to sabotage us." I let the silence stretch, my heart thudding with a satisfaction I didn't show. "I don't know, Emily," I said softly, "but sometimes sabotage looks a lot like consequence." She bristled. "Are you implying—" "I'm not implying anything," I interrupted, my tone gentle but firm. "I'm just saying the truth always finds its way out." The line went quiet. Then she hung up. I sat there in the motel room, staring at the cracked ceiling, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled. It wasn't enough. Not nearly. But it was a beginning. The next week, I happened to pass by the Whitaker estate. From the road, I could see their perfect house glowing against the night, every light blazing as though they were trying to ward off the darkness pressing in. I slowed my car, watching shadows move inside, Edward's tall frame gesturing angrily, Daniel's shoulders hunched, Emily's hands raised as she pleaded. For once, it wasn't me standing in silence while others dictated the terms. For once, they were the ones on edge, and I realized then that revenge doesn't roar in all at once. It whispers first. It unsettles. It chips away until the ground beneath your enemy's feet begins to tremble. The ground was trembling now, and soon enough, it would collapse. When you corner a rat, it doesn't surrender. It bares its teeth. The Whitakers were no different. The tremors I'd set in motion spread quickly. A missed payment here, a regulator sniffing around there. Edward's paranoia grew. Daniel's arrogance cracked, and Emily's once confident smile faltered. But instead of retreating, they lashed back with venom. It started with whispers in the community. A rumor that I had lost my mind, that I was senile, unstable, a bitter old man who couldn't accept that his daughter had moved on with her life. At first, I dismissed it as idle talk. But then, the rumors became official. One afternoon, a social worker appeared at my motel. She asked if I was safe, if I had anyone to care for me, if I understood the papers I had signed. I stared at her, realization settling heavy in my chest. Edward and Daniel were building a case, not just to humiliate me, but to declare me legally incompetent, to strip me of credibility entirely. Gaslighting on a grand scale. I laughed bitterly when she left, shaking my head. They wanted me erased so badly, they were now painting me as a lunatic. But rage quickly cooled into clarity. If they were doubling down, then they felt threatened, which meant my strikes were working. And they had no idea what I still held in my pocket. You see, when Margaret was alive, she and I bought a small piece of land outside of town. Nothing much, just a few acres by the river, a place we dreamed of building a cabin one day. Life and bills kept us from ever following through, but I never sold it. I never even mentioned it, not to Emily, not to anyone. Quietly, over the years, I paid the taxes, kept it in good standing, tucked away like a seed waiting for the right season. That land wasn't just property. It was leverage. Because unknown to the Whitakers, the zoning rights on it had shifted in recent years. What had once been sleepy farmland was now prime real estate for commercial development, and developers had been calling me, offering numbers that would make Daniel salivate. I didn't sell, not yet, but I kept their letters, their offers, proof that I had something they didn't control, and it wasn't my only card. For months, I had been recording every phone call, every visit, even the venomous little remarks Daniel let slip when he thought Emily wasn't listening. I carried a small recorder in my coat pocket, the kind you buy at an office supply store. They thought I was just rambling old Joseph, harmless and forgetful. But the machine caught everything, including Daniel once sneering, "Your father won't be around much longer. Trust me," followed by Emily's silence. That silence was the real betrayal. So when the Whitakers summoned me to Edward's estate under the guise of a family discussion, I knew what was coming. I shaved, put on my best suit, and walked into that mansion with my head high. They sat me down in the living room, 3 against 1. Emily avoided my eyes. Daniel leaned forward like a predator about to pounce, and Edward steepled his fingers, his voice slow and deliberate. "Joseph," he began, "we're concerned. Your behavior lately, the accusations, the meddling, it isn't healthy. We've spoken with some people, doctors, lawyers. We believe it's in your best interest to assign us power of attorney. That way, we can manage things for you. Protect you. Protect me." I let their words sink in, let them feel the weight of their own arrogance. They thought they had me cornered, that fear and confusion would cloud my judgment. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and set it gently on the table. "What's this?" Daniel sneered, snatching it up. "Deed," I said simply, "to the land Margaret and I bought by the river. It's mine. Always has been. Developers are very interested. Millions interest." The room shifted. Edward's eyes narrowed. Daniel's smirk faltered. Emily's lips parted in surprise. "You never told us," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I didn't." Edward recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "Well then, that's wonderful, Joseph. Of course, with the right guidance." I cut him off by placing a small recorder on the table. I pressed play. Daniel's voice filled the room, unmistakable. "Your father won't be around much longer. Trust me." The silence afterward was deafening. Emily paled. Edward's face darkened. Daniel lunged for the device, but I snatched it back before his hand could touch it. I leaned back, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "I may be old, I may be tired, but I am not stupid. Every lie, every trap, every word you've used to try and erase me, I've kept it all." The standoff crackled in the air. For the first time, they weren't looking at a broken old man. They were looking at the one person who could unravel everything they had built. Their reputation, their finances, their future. And in that moment, I saw fear. Not much. Just a flicker. But it was enough. I stood, tucking the recorder back into my coat. "You wanted me erased," I said softly. "But you forgot who raised Emily, who built everything she stands on. You forgot that silence remembers." I walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance back at my daughter. She sat frozen, her eyes glassy, torn between the family she had chosen and the father she had betrayed. That hesitation, that weakness, was all I needed, because this was no longer their game. It was mine. The Whitakers always knew how to gloat. It was their favorite sport. More than golf, more than charity galas, more than the endless parades of wealth. Gloating was how they survived. And the night they thought they had erased me completely, they put on their finest performance. The gathering was billed as a family celebration. Edward's voice boomed on the phone, almost gleeful as he invited me. "Come along, Joseph," he said. "It's time to put the past behind us. Time for new beginnings." New beginnings! I could practically taste the smugness. Still, I accepted. I arrived in my best suit, the same one I had worn to Emily's graduation all those years ago, when she had once called me her hero. My shoes were polished, my back straight. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them one. The Whitaker estate gleamed that night. Chandeliers glowing, crystal glasses clinking, the kind of excess that makes people whisper about old money. The room buzzed with business associates, family friends, and local officials, the very crowd that fed on the Whitakers' reputation. I wasn't seated at the table. No, they placed me off to the side near the wall, like an old coat someone had forgotten to hang. Emily avoided my eyes. Daniel strutted about, shaking hands, grinning too wide, and Edward sat at the head, glowing with the satisfaction of a man who believed the world was finally arranged to his liking. Midway through the evening, Edward rose, glass in hand. He tapped it lightly with a spoon, commanding silence. The room obeyed. "Friends," he began, his voice rich and booming, "tonight we celebrate more than family. We celebrate triumph. We celebrate the future. My son-in-law, Daniel, has secured a major development deal, one that will ensure the Whitaker legacy continues to shine for generations." Applause filled the room. Daniel beamed. Emily squeezed his arm, though her smile looked a shade too tight. Edward went on, "It has not been easy. There have been obstacles, distractions, even sabotage. But as always, the Whitakers prevail." His gaze slid toward me, lingering just long enough for the crowd to follow. Whispers rippled like waves. Heads turned. I felt their eyes. The poor old man, the nuisance, the fool who had tried to fight the powerful. Daniel stepped forward then, placing a hand on Edward's shoulder. "That's right. Some people can't accept change. They can't let go of the past, but we don't let bitterness define us. We move forward, and tonight proves it. Nothing and no one can stand in our way." The room erupted again, laughter and clapping, the sound of smug victory. I waited. I let them bask. I let their arrogance swell to its peak. And then, slowly, I stood. The clinking stopped. Heads turned. A hush fell. "Edward," I said calmly, my voice steady, "you're right about one thing. Tonight is about triumph, but not yours." Confusion flickered across faces. Daniel frowned. Edward narrowed his eyes. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folder. Thick, heavy, brimming with papers. I laid it on the table with deliberate slowness. "This," I said, "is the deed to the riverfront property Margaret and I purchased years ago. It is mine, and tonight it becomes the cornerstone of a deal. Not yours, Daniel. Mine." Gasps rippled through the room. "Lies!" Daniel snapped. "You're bluffing." I smiled faintly. "Am I?" I pulled out the signed agreement, the ink still fresh from a developer eager to break ground. The number at the bottom made the room stir. Millions. Enough to dwarf Daniel's precarious project, enough to shift the balance. Edward's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emily's hand slipped from her husband's arm. But I wasn't finished. I placed a small recorder beside the papers. "And this," I said, pressing play, "is Daniel." His voice spilled into the air, unmistakable, cruel, damning. "Your father won't be around much longer, trust me." The words echoed against the high ceilings, hanging heavy in the silence that followed. Gasps, murmurs, heads swiveling toward Emily, toward me, toward Daniel, whose face had gone scarlet. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "Family," I said softly, my eyes fixed on my daughter, "is not something you poison. It's not something you evict. It's not something you erase with lies and signatures. Family is sacrifice. Family is love. And when you forget that, you lose everything." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Edward slammed his fist against the table, but the sound was hollow, desperate. I leaned closer, my voice low, but carrying through the room. "You tried to bury me, but you forgot one thing." I paused, letting every eye rest on me. "You can't bury a man who remembers where all the bodies are." The room erupted, not in applause, but in whispers, in judgment, in the shifting of alliance. Business partners exchanged looks. Officials frowned. The Whitakers' empire, so carefully built on image and arrogance, cracked in real time before their eyes. Edward sat frozen, his hands trembling. Daniel muttered excuses, stumbling over words, but no one listened. And Emily, my daughter, bowed her head, silent tears tracing her cheeks. I gathered my papers, my recorder, and turned to leave. At the door, I looked back one final time. "Consider this my last gift to the family," I said. "The truth." And with that, I walked out into the cool Minnesota night, my back straight, my heart steady. For the first time in years, I felt whole. After that night at the Whitakers' estate, the world did what it always does when blood meets water. It fed. Whispers turned into stories. Stories turned into headlines, and headlines turned into reputations unraveling. Daniel's development deal collapsed within weeks. Investors pulled out. Regulators leaned in. Edward, once so proud, became a fixture of pity, shuffling through town with a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but powerless to mend the cracks in his empire. And Emily, my daughter, retreated into silence. She didn't call. She didn't visit. Not at first. Shame builds a wall taller than anger ever could. And she stayed behind it, watching her world crumble. I didn't need to drag out their consequences. I didn't need to gloat, or shout, or dance on the ashes. That was their way, not mine. Life has a way of balancing its own scales. I simply stepped aside and let gravity do its work. For me, peace came in quieter places. The land by the river, the one Margaret and I once dreamed of, became my refuge. I didn't sell it, though the offers still came. Instead, I built a small cabin with my own hands, slower than I once could, but steady. The mornings there carried a kind of silence that healed me. Birdsong at dawn, water rippling against the shore, the whisper of wind through the pines. Some evening, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun fall across the water, and I'd think about Margaret. I imagined her smile, her laugh, the way she used to place her hand on mine when life grew heavy. I like to believe she would have been proud, not of revenge, but of survival, of dignity held firm when everything else was stripped away. In time, Emily did come. One afternoon, months later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. She stood there, thinner, older in spirit than her years. Her eyes brimmed with regret. She didn't speak at first, just stood, trembling like the little girl who once crawled into my bed after Margaret's passing. When words finally came, they were soft, broken. "I'm sorry, Dad." I didn't rush to forgive her. Wounds like mine don't vanish with a sentence, but I saw the truth in her eyes, the recognition of the damage done, and that was enough. We sat together on the porch in silence, letting the river speak for us. I didn't need her to undo what had been done. I only needed her to remember who I was, her father. And that was the quiet victory I had longed for more than any deal or document. As I sit here now, years stretched behind me, I've come to understand something most people don't until it's too late. Time has a way of humbling us all. Youth believes it will last forever. Wealth believes it can buy loyalty, and arrogance believes it can silence truth. But the years strip all of that away. What remains is character, and character does not lie. The Whitakers learned that too late. Their arrogance became their undoing. My silence became my weapon, and my patience became my revenge. In the end, the poisoned chocolates were not the true betrayal. They were only a symbol, a sweet wrapper over bitterness, a reminder that even those we love most can forget the meaning of loyalty. But life, like chocolate, always reveals what it's filled with. And theirs was poison. Mine was something else. So if there is a lesson in all this, it is simple. Respect cannot be demanded, only earned. Age is not a weakness, but a crown. worn by those who have walked farther than others dare to. And karma, whether carried by poisoned chocolates, broken contracts, or whispered lies, always finds its way home. I no longer need to prove myself, not to Edward, not to Daniel, not even to Emily. My peace is in knowing that I remained who I was, even when they tried to erase me. And perhaps that is the truest revenge of all. Thank you for watching this story all the way through. If it touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts or even your own experiences in the comments below. Your voice truly matters here. And if you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more than you know and keeps our community growing. Until next time, take care of yourself, hold on to what truly matters, and remember, respect and loyalty are worth more than gold.